Today, we're digging into a truly fascinating, almost forgotten period in Sri Lanka's ancient history. We're talking about a time of radical transformation, a time when pretty much everything changed.
And really, it all boils down to this one massive question. How does a society of hunter-gatherers, people who lived in nomadic life for thousands of years, suddenly decide to put down roots and start building a civilization? Well, let's find out.
So let's start by setting the scene. We're going to dive into this pivotal era, a period that archaeologists like to call Sri Lanka's Great Transition.
This period is officially known as the Proto-historic era. Now, the best way to think of it is like a bridge connecting the deep, ancient past of the Stone Age with the beginning of what we call recorded history. It's also called the Early Iron Age, and trust me, that name, iron, is a huge clue about what made this time so revolutionary.
So, what did this change actually look like on the ground? Well, on one side, you have prehistoric life. People are nomadic, they're using stone tools, and they're living off whatever they can hunt and gather. And then, during the proto-historic era, boom, everything flips. Suddenly, you've got iron tools, you've got the beginnings of farming, and, for the very first time, people are building permanent settlements. This wasn't just a small change, it was a complete reinvention of how to live.
So how in the world do we know all this? Where do we even start to piece this story together? Well, and this is what's so fascinating. Our first big clues don't actually come from the world of the living. They come from the afterlife.
I know it might sound a little backward, but the story of how these people lived their daily lives really begins with how they treated their dead. The most prominent, best-preserved evidence we have from this entire era comes from their burial grounds, and they tell us so much about their beliefs, their technology, and their society.
For example, take a look at this. It's called a cyst burial, from a site called Ibangkatua. What they would do is build these small, box-like chambers using huge stone slabs. Then, inside, they'd place clay pots that held human remains. Dating tells us these burials happened between 750 and 450 BC, which shows a really methodical and deeply spiritual approach to death.
But that wasn't the only way they did things. Archaeologists also discover something way more unusual. Burials inside these large clay tubs shaped kind of like boats. It's a really unique practice, and it tells us that different groups in different areas have their own distinct rituals.
And here is the real deal, an actual clay tub burial dug up at a site called Ranchamadakama. Now, the process here was just incredible. They would place the body inside one of these raw clay tubs and then cremate them right there. The fire was so intense that it actually fired the clay, turning the tub into a permanent ceramic coffin and preserving it for more than 3,000 years. Just ingenious.
Okay, so we know they had these very complex, very meaningful rituals for their dead. But that's only half the story, right? So now, let's make that pivot from the world of the dead to the world of the living, and take a look at their very first permanent homes.
And this was the crucial question for archaeologists for a long, long time. We could see how much they honored the dead in these elaborate cemeteries, but where did they live? For decades, we had the burial grounds, but we had no houses. It was a real mystery. Until this. This was the breakthrough. What you're looking at is a recreation of the first ever known permanent house from the Protohistoric era, discovered at a site called Udaranchamadama. For the first time, archaeologists had a real glimpse into their domestic world.
And get this, based on artifacts found inside, this house was built around 1129 BC. That is over 3,000 years ago. An absolutely astonishingly ancient structure that really marks the very beginning of settled life in this part of the world.
So what did it look like? Well, it was a pretty solid building. It had a rectangular shape, about 10 meters long and almost 7 meters wide. Inside, a wall divided it into a front room and a back room. The walls themselves were made using a technique called wattle and daub, which is basically a wooden lattice that's packed with a sticky mix of clay and soil. The roof was thatched, probably using a local grass called ilak. You know, a simple design but sturdy and effective.
All right, so we've seen the building itself. Now let's do something really cool. Let's step inside and, using the clues they left behind, try to reconstruct what a day in the life might have actually been like for these people.
And believe me, the inside of this house was an absolute treasure trove for archaeologists. They found everything you could imagine. Beautifully painted pottery, tools made of both iron and stone, leftover animal bones from their meals, even personal items like clay beads and cosmetics. Every single object tells a piece of their story.
For instance, just look at this pot. It's not just a simple piece of clay. It's got this white background with these perfectly symmetrical red lions painted on it. Now that kind of symmetry is almost impossible to do by hand. It strongly suggests they were using a potter's wheel, a major technological leap that shows just how skilled their craftspeople were.
And what about dinner? Well, the animal bones from the kitchen area give us a pretty clear menu. They were hunting deer, wild boar, even giant squirrels. But, and this is so important, they also found cattle bones. That's the proof that they were farming and raising livestock. They had fully embraced agriculture, but they still hadn't completely given up the old ways of hunting. You're literally seeing a society in transition.
But you know, it's the other items that really bring these people to life. Archaeologists also found things like clay beads, grinding stones used for making body paint, and even a tiny iron stick that was used to apply coal eyeliner. It's a powerful reminder that life back then wasn't just about pure survival. It was also about culture, beauty, and self-expression. Okay, so we've seen how they lived and what they ate, and even a little bit about their culture, but that just brings up an even bigger question. Why? Why did all of this happen? Why would you abandon a nomadic lifestyle that worked for thousands of years? Let's zoom out and see how this new era was forged.
And it seems the most likely answer, the main catalyst for all this change, was the weather. As the world started to warm up at the end of the last ice age, it created a much better environment all across South Asia for something new to take root: agriculture.
And once that happened, it set off a chain reaction, like a line of dominoes. First, the climate warms up. That makes farming possible. Once you can grow your own food, you don't have to wander around anymore, so you build permanent homes. And once you're settled in one place, you finally have the time and the stability to develop new technologies, like iron tools and advanced pottery. One single change kicked off a complete revolution in their society.
And that's what's so incredible. We've learned all of this from basically a single house and a few burial sites. It just makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other secrets from this incredible, forgotten revolution are still buried just beneath the soil of Sri Lanka, waiting to be discovered?